Join us and our friends as we fall down the rabbit hole of security wonder. If you're ready to see how deep it goes, you've found the right place. Pour your tea. You're not late for office hours. And now, our Red Queen, Tara Wheeler. Join us and our friends as we fall down.
It is lovely to have you folks here with us today. How are you doing this week? I'm Tara Wheeler. I'm the CEO of Red Queen Dynamics. It is fabulous to be here again, and I'm looking forward to this week's Cybersecurity Office Hours. This week, I am super excited to bring you my dear friend, Stephen Jones. Jones joined the Data Prize team in 2020, and he is now their Vice President of Cybersecurity Services. He's responsible for the strategic design, development, and execution of managed security service offerings. He is a veteran, and I'm here to tell you that's true, in the security operations space, bringing 20 years of experience in cybersecurity and technical leadership to the team. I am thrilled to have you aboard this week. Jones, how's it going?
Hey, it's fantastic. Thank you for having me. Long-time listener, first-time guest.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely amazing. I mean, remember, folks, we're here for you. But, if nobody wants to ask questions this week, I am fairly sure that Jones and I can just sit here and fill the entire time up with grousing and coffee. Not going to be a problem. But join in whenever you want to. If you got your questions for a vet in the managed security services and offerings in the MSP world, I mean, this is the guy to ask the questions of. So super glad to have you here with us this week. Tell us a little bit about what led you on the journey to end up at Data Prize, what your life is like, and give me an interesting fact or two about your existence right now.
Yeah, sure. So how I ended up at Data Prize is a bit of an interesting story. I'll kind of start way back. I spent my first decade in the intelligence community. So 9/11 happened while I was in high school at the time. I grew up in Alexandria, Virginia, as the crow flies to like the Pentagon, very, very close. And actually ended up losing a family member in the Pentagon. So most of my graduating class ended up joining the military or doing something to kind of help that effort. I got into the intel community and figured that was the way I could help, is put my tech skills to use to help the warfighters. So I spent a decade there, ran the Computer Network Defense Center for DIA as a civilian, as a contractor, and that was a ton of fun. I learned so much, kind of became who I am today through that process, and then was fortunate enough to get out with an opportunity to co-found what is today the company Deepwatch. So they're a huge pure play security provider in the MSSP space. I was employee number one, co-founder of that capability, wore all the hats, probably why I don't have hair anymore. That really gave me a taste for what this was like on the commercial side. And I led Deepwatch for almost 7 years, ended up separating with them and kind of going on a new adventure, and ended up at Data Prize. They were looking to really restructure their cybersecurity department from the ground up. They had a brand new CEO with a new vision, really excited about cybersecurity. Previously they were primarily an MSP. So we ripped it all down to studs, built an amazing team, and a really powerful capability. And I've been at Data Prize now for coming up on 3 years. So it's been a heck of an adventure. And again, a ton of things learned. This is my fourth MSSP that I have helped build or run. And it has been an absolute blast. And every day continues to be an adventure.
I'm glad. I'm glad that it's an adventure. We often in this field end up kind of at this place. After you do about 2 decades in security, you kind of end up either, I think, just kind of angry and in a basement somewhere,
That's true.
or you end up with just this sense of, I would almost call it love for people and understanding and a respect for them that really gets to the fact that people have very different skills. And lawyers and doctors and truck drivers and accountants, like, these are all people that have very different skills that I certainly did not want to acquire when I was busy acquiring my skills, and I'm glad that they
Sure.
exist out there. There's often this sense, I think, in security that we talk about stupid user tricks and pebcac, and that's a problem sometimes. And I think one of the things that always struck me about you as I was having conversations with you is that you're you're suffused with a sense of respect for the people you're serving, even if they don't have any security expertise. How did you end up fending off the rage?
Well, I'll tell you, Tara, I went through the rage phase for sure. I think we all do. It's a rite of passage, like you said, in the field, is you go through the anger phase of really just being frustrated and upset at everything and everybody. But I think what ultimately kind of did it for me is kind of the realization that everybody here has a purpose, everybody has a skill, everybody has a thing, and it was really understanding through the MSSP space that, you know, we're serving a company that maybe manufactures car parts, right? And that's the thing that they're good at, and that's what their business is for. Their business is not for cybersecurity. They may not have thought about cybersecurity because, you know, they're making mufflers and tailpipes and things like that. So it really came through the understanding of working with those companies that there's a thing that they're very good at. There's a thing that I'm very good at, or that my team can bring to the table. And I think that's what helped put it all in perspective for me, was that they have their job, I have mine. And that got me through the rage phase to the point where now I just want to help, right? I want to help people, not only our customers, but I want to help younger folks that are coming up into this field as well. There's a unique set of challenges for folks that are entering this field now.
I'm I'm glad to hear that this is about respecting people. And it's hard to do sometimes, especially when sometimes there's very active pushback from people on security measures that you know are going to be a good idea for them. I mean, I think we often go through that same period of rage. Maybe the best doctors often go through that sometime in the middle of their career too, because like they know it's a bad idea for us to be smoking, and
Sure.
overweight and busy eating French fries. I'm gonna do it the fries, right? I'm gonna eat those anyway. And so at some point, I think doctors have to come to grips with the fact that everybody is very different. I'm always interested in sort of how that works. I always ask doctors how they got over that period of anger with people for not doing the right thing for their health. Same way that I always ask security guards and cocktail waitresses what brand of shoes they're wearing, because that is valuable information. Like anything that somebody can stand all day long, and I want to know what the shoes are.
Sure. Yeah, yeah,
So
no, that's a
yeah,
good.
exactly. So and I think about that, and we give these recommendations to people, and they don't follow them, and then they get stuck up at computer point, right? Like ransomware is getting mugged with a computer, and the challenges for that are only growing. And that's not what you would expect. You would expect somebody would have gotten a handle on it by now. And
Yeah,
yet, when I'm asked what I'm going to be doing for the next 10 years, as a person who's well known in cybersecurity, I tell them invoice fraud, spear phishing, and ransomware. I'm going to be doing
yeah.
those three things for the next 10 years. And they're like, but we already solved those problems. And I was like, brother, what we have solved are the technical elements of it. We just haven't gotten anybody to solve that any more than telling people to lose weight and quit smoking makes them lose weight and quit smoking, right? Like what do we do about that? We're seeing what ransomware payments hit $1 billion in 2023, and I'm kind of curious, like what do we start to do about that? How do we start to mitigate this problem? You've seen this again and again and again. What are your thoughts on this?
So here's my honest to goodness thoughts, and I've kind of come to this realization in maybe the last 5 or so years, and I think a lot of people tend to look at these types of situations, ransomware, the invoice fraud, and things like that. They look at them as purely technical problems, and they completely miss that 90% of the issue, if not more, right? I mean, it may be a higher percentage, is psychology. And I think cybersecurity is probably more psychology than it is almost anything else, right? The technical component, 5-10% maybe, right? I mean, as far as being able to block a phishing email, to notice when the link text and the actual target in the HTML are different, right? And being able to detect those things, having a good endpoint on your machine, all of those things, like, yes, we've solved those technical challenges. The thing you haven't solved for is the psychology and the training. And I think this is why these things continue to be so effective, is because hackers and scammers have really dialed into what makes people tick. I mean, it's honestly genius to watch the creativity that has come out with how they're getting to, or how they're tricking people. What are the tactics that they're employing? They're all psychology, right? It's using clickbaity titles because they know that clickbaity stuff really drives attention. It's preying on certain types of emotions because they know that those emotions elicit a response. And so I think this is where we're failing to address these, because we're actually not doing it in the correct place. And I think the correct place is actually addressing the psychology of these things in school and
Mm.
addressing them socially, right? So we're raising a generation now, and I have kids that are in the public school system, and we're raising a generation of kids that are only getting very cursory information, if anything, in their school, right? And that's probably depending on the school district, about real life stuff that they are facing every day, right? They have phones, they have tablets, they have email addresses, but we're not preparing them to deal with that. They barely understand how the technology works because they've grown up with it already working, right? I mean, when we were growing up, we know how this stuff works because we had to build it because it didn't work when we were younger. And so I think this is, from a human aspect, I think that's where we're falling down right now, is that we're not addressing the psychology side. On the
Yeah.
professional, the professional business side, as an MSSP, as an MSP, I think there's still a real big challenge around navigating the fine line between doing the right thing for security and doing the right thing for the business. I think there's still largely a disconnect there, for a variety of reasons. I don't think that one's as much psychology, but I think we're still seeing business decisions being made where cybersecurity gets excluded, and I see that very commonly.
I'm so interested as you're talking about this. I was having a conversation in a kind of an AI conversation and dinner with some people at Council on Foreign Relations a couple of days ago here in Seattle. And one of the things that came up again and again is, how do we teach people what AI looks like?
Mhm.
And one of the things that I think about when I think about that is Emmanuel Macron's recent legislation in France that mandates civics education for all
Yeah,
school children.
yeah,
And I don't know when we got rid of civics in American schools, but I feel like the answer to many of the things you're describing right now, which is just understand how our world works, really
yeah,
kind of came from that. Like, it goes from how a bill becomes law to how do you know if your phone is safe? Do you have a right to privacy? These conversations we should be getting kids started on, I think.
sure,
So I
yeah,
mean, we can go further and further into that, but I feel like there's a conversation to be had about how early can we begin this process? Because at the point at which you are 30 years old, and the first time you've ever understood that it's not okay to click on a phishing email is a corporate training, you're in some very deep trouble, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I get it. I get it. So I'm thinking about that, and I think about the way that we process and think about information and education, and the way that the way that we are given information by itself is a problem, as it's often, I think, dry and unpalatable, or it's newsertainment, which is
yeah,
valueless, right?
yeah,
And I'm looking at, like, we talk all the time about the SEC reporting requirements, and the SEC reporting requirements themselves are just, they're devastatingly difficult to understand at the base
yeah, they
level, because
are.
they're a legal requirement as opposed to a technical requirement.
Hmm.
So what happened? It was the SEC regs came out in 2023. These new ones that people are expected to abide by. And when I look at them, one of the challenges that I kind of perpetually see is, because they're legal, you put lawyers on them and you find a way to kind of get around them. And I'm
Yeah,
thinking right now about the Change Healthcare hack that happened, as we all know. I mean, half the country's been impacted by this one. This is without any hesitation the largest healthcare hack that's ever happened in U.S. history,
yep,
which is a fascinating one. This is going to have the impact, I think, in the U.S. that WannaCry did in the U.K. And the challenge there is Change Health and United Healthcare did what they were technically supposed to do by reporting, we have had a data breach slash ransomware attack within 4 days of the attack. What they didn't give was the relevant information. What was the breadth of the attack? What are the impacts of it? They didn't report publicly that they paid the $22 million ransom in Bitcoin. And they didn't report it because they didn't have to. In fact, they
Yeah.
still never admitted to paying that ransom. The only reason that we have any belief that ransom was paid is because the Bitcoin wallet of the scammers, this is who is it? It's Alpha V, I think,
Yeah. Alfie. Yeah.
that did this one. LV, yeah. So the only reason we know that the ransom was paid is because we know that that's what the demand was, and we know that it was paid. So there was no disclosure by this company on this, and SEC reporting requirements are only as good as the legal opinions standing in the way of them and getting the relevant information to people.
Yeah.
So I want to dig further into that, but I want to ask if you've got any thoughts on this.
Yeah. I mean, so I tend to agree with you that a lot of these regulations end up being more legalese than they are kind of uh, technical requirements, and I think that really changes the intended effect for what happens. And to your point, right? They never had to admit certain things. There were chunks of information that they kind of got to sweep under the rug about this, and it ultimately wasn't in the public's best interest. And so I think this is where as a community there should be better processes around developing these types of frameworks. I think these types of reporting frameworks are going to become more and more ubiquitous, especially because it takes the law so long to catch up with technology. I think that's the kind of part of the issue here is it has taken so long. We're a bit behind the curve. We're well ahead of this from a technological perspective, and the law is lagging behind in what's required. I think the general public's ignorance is also a huge reason why this hasn't gotten better. The average person doesn't really seem to care. Like, I mean, if you look back at some of the really big compromises that happen, Home Depot, Target, things like this, people still shop there. Like it was a blip on a map, and nobody really cared. And I think until the general public generally cares, you're not going to see anything better. And unfortunately, this is, I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, but there is obviously a lot of political posturing to doing things like these SEC guidelines, so as not to overly encumber the business, even at the expense of sacrificing the public's right to know about what's going on.
I agree on that one. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, one of the challenges we often have with cybersecurity and getting people to pay attention to it is making them understand the physical harms that happen to people when
Sure.
cyber attacks happen. This is the first time in the United States that a cyber attack has, on a widespread basis, meant that people die.
Yeah.
Don't tell me that in the last month and a half since this happened, that somebody hasn't died for lack of getting their medication. And yet, at the same time, there's not a way to report that as a cause of death.
Yeah.
So it's I am sure, I am positive that there's going to be some class action lawsuits brought against the actors involved in this process, because people will be able to start putting together a body of preponderant evidence that says I was not able to purchase this medication, for my mom, and she died as a result, and it was because of your policies and practices. This might be the first time that we see a regulatory sting that is based around the actuarial value of hurting somebody in a cyber attack. And as soon as you can pin money to an attack like this, all of a sudden it matters, right? Like, people
Yeah.
didn't care about Target, but they're going to care if their mom dies because she didn't get her diabetes medication.
Yeah, I agree with that. And what's funny, as you were mentioning that, Tara, obviously a bit of, it's national news now, but it was very, very local here. The bridge in Baltimore that got hit the other day. I have seen nonstop, very baseless accusations that was a cybersecurity attack on the vessel. This is a narrative that's being pushed, right? Is that it was a cybersecurity attack to cripple the infrastructure that ultimately caused these deaths. Now, I think that one's obviously baseless. I have not seen obviously
Yeah.
any evidence to that effect. I watched the video. I saw the flickering power on and off on the boat and the NTSB reports, but I think you're right. I think in America here, the Change Healthcare thing is absolutely going to lead to some additional change. I know that it's Romania, I believe. Their hospital system's been down for a month and a half, 2 months, something like that, because of ransomware and cybersecurity attacks. They've shut down all the hospitals, or a huge chunk of hospitals in Romania. And I am quite positive that that's causing quite a deleterious healthcare, the ability to provide surgeries and things like that for those folks. So it's, while I think the American situation is probably going to garner the most amount of change, this is happening all around the world now. And this is, I think, the new normal right now, is that healthcare and things like that really have a massive impact are going to be huge targets, because they'll pay, because they can't afford to have the ER shut down for this long. And I think that's a huge amount of leverage, and again, psychology, that these attackers have for these folks.
Let's get spicy. I've spent some time talking about this before. I've written on this with Kieran Martin, who is the CEO of NCSC during WannaCry. We've talked a lot about whether or not you should pay a ransomware. You should pay ransoms. You ever told anybody to pay a ransom or not to, and why?
So I have always advised not to. From an ethical standpoint, I think it's wrong to pay an extortion, period. Now, I have always caveated that with my client by advising, if you have not taken any of the necessary prerequisite steps to have data backed up, to have some cyber resiliency here, and paying this ransom is the only shot you have of getting this back up, knowing that there is no guarantee that paying the ransom is going to get your intended result, then go ahead and do it. But my advice is no. And it always comes from an ethical place. When you paying ransoms, paying extortion only serves to perpetuate that behavior and activity, because people do it. It's why spammers send millions of phishing emails, because 3 or 4 grandmas click on that and it works. It absolutely works. So, that's my take on it. If you absolutely shouldn't, and in almost every case, you would be better off just eating whatever the downtime or whatever it is, and getting back up and running, versus paying, because you're identifying yourself as somebody who will pay if you're hurt enough. I think it's unethical to perpetuate the activity, and at the end of the day, I think it tends to be used as a kind of a get out of jail, not free, but get out of jail card. Most people, when they pay it, they do get something out of it. But I typically advise no. Have you ever advised somebody to pay one?
I have advised, advised, I think at least at this point, 2 bodies to pay, and it was solely because they were holding healthcare data that would save lives. That's it.
Yeah.
And the answer is that there are times when negotiating with it's the difference between negotiating with a kidnapper and negotiating with a terrorist, right?
Sure.
Like, there's a reason the U.S. has a policy of never negotiating with terrorists. On an individual level, if no one's coming to save you, does anybody have the right to save themselves, right? And I think to myself, small businesses, small healthcare practices, I have said basically the exact same things you have said. It's ethically wrong. You're identifying yourself as somebody who will pay.
Yeah.
However, I am very familiar with the mechanisms and behind when someone negotiates with ransomware, with ransomers. I know some of the people that do this negotiation professionally that are called in by cyber insurance providers.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, if your cyber insurer is expecting you to pay a ransom, and they have built that into the process, and you are a small to mid-sized enterprise, especially one that has critical infrastructure, healthcare, I don't think it's right. But if you have already had that built into the expectation of what you are paying for your cyber insurance, and your cyber insurer says you have to pay the ransom, and this is the amount you're going to pay, and we're going to call in a professional negotiator, I want you to explain to me what 40-person accounting practice, what
Yeah.
60-person dental practice would have either the expertise to handle that situation on their own without engaging, or would have the wherewithal and context to push back on that decision. That's a really
Sure.
hard one, and I think the answer is no one's coming to save them. We as a society, we have kind of given up on the idea that small businesses, medium-sized businesses, MSPs should get the same kind of support and bailouts that large businesses get. When a large business, a too big to fail business, has a major cyber attack and it is a critical piece of U.S. infrastructure, they get all kind of support and help. But right now, the Small Business Administration in the United States has allocated $6 million, $6 million, not billion, $6 million for 2024 to assist small businesses in uplifting their cybersecurity posture. Jones, there are 33.6 million small businesses in the United States, which means that that's about 18 cents per small business in the US
Yeah.
to help cybersecurity. No one's
Yep.
coming to save you. How do I advise somebody to not save themselves? Right?
Yeah, yeah, and I agree with you. I think that it really does have to be such a case by case basis, and that's how I have to enter every one of those conversations, is fully understanding what's at risk here, what's at stake, what's being done. But yeah, I hate having these conversations with clients who come and say, "Hey, we got ransom, we don't know what to do,"
Yeah.
and it breaks my heart so much to see that.
It does. And I love this question from Tara Bartels. This is a great one right here. It's also that businesses are often stewards, not just of their own data, but of other people's data, right? That accounting firm might be getting threatened with the leak of 3,000 high net worth individuals' tax returns, right? And
Yep.
sure, it's devastating for their business, but they also have a responsibility to try to do their best to stop those people from becoming, additional victims of an attack like this. Where does the responsibility stop? And I mean, we don't have the current policy and support mechanisms in place to help solve that problem yet. I think CIS is doing a damn fine job by making sure there are state and regional coordinators that you can report and get help from. But right now, I don't see any of the things that I would want to see, like a tax credit for small businesses for cybersecurity uplift. I don't see even a
Yeah.
temporary. I don't see a backstop for cyber insurers to provide insurance to less insurable, but certainly desperately in need of assistance small businesses in this country. So what do you think the solutions are?
So I think I, I've been kind of preaching this from my soapbox for a long time. I don't think we see the cybersecurity plight change until cybersecurity becomes a core value for every business. I've been saying this for a long time. People kind of laugh when I say it. We have core values around treating people a certain way, being responsive, taking care of certain things, taking care of a customer, but no business. I have seen none, exactly none, that have cybersecurity as a core value in their business. Now, they all have data, they all use computer systems, they all collect, most of them collect payment in some form or another. But a core value of their business is not protecting any of that. And so I think until that happens, nothing significantly changes. Now, on the other thought that you had, I am surprised that while the White House has put out some additional cybersecurity guidance, that they haven't done anything. To your point, a tax credit for businesses that want to strengthen their cybersecurity profile and their cyber maturity. There's obviously lots of companies out there. You mentioned like your 40 person dental practice. My dentist. I was just in recently talking to my dentist about his cybersecurity situation. And they don't have those resources, but if you gave them the tax incentive to go do it, I think that helps push the ball forward. Right now, they're left to their own devices, and my dentist that runs this practice, he has to decide between the machinery that it takes to run the business and hire the people to do the thing, versus, thinking about all of the things that go into cybersecurity and spending the money there to protect patient records and all of his HIPAA requirements and things like that. So I'm surprised the federal government hasn't done more to step up. $6 million is almost an insulting number. Like, it was almost a why bother, even setting that much aside. Ultimately, it's not the government's responsibility, but I think if you want to see the cybersecurity maturity of companies in America drastically change, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take some incentive. And, I think the Fed's going to have to step in and really help, if that's their desired goal, which the White House says it is, right? They recognize the problem. It's time to start putting the rubber on the road and actually incentivizing people to get it done.
I 100% agree. And one of the things that it annoys me kind of a lot. You and I are having this conversation, and we are computer janitors, my
Yeah.
friend. We're here just working at this level, at the very beginning, the trickles, the above the cascades of the Nile, at the basin of the Amazon. We're at the very beginning of the supply chain for the defense industrial base. So we're over here just like looking at people's machines, talking about this, building products and building services that help people stay safe. But I also spend like a slice of my time over in the policy world, and it, upon occasion, stuns me at the lack of technologists and people in positions like you or I have, in the big conversations at the White House, in policy land. And I'm just
Yeah.
super curious, when we've got these conversations going, and we're not being asked. First of all, you and I are having a sophisticated conversation right now, and I would very much like a bunch of people I can think of in DC and New York right now to listen to this conversation. But here's, I guess the question. We don't have access to those conversations. I do upon occasion, but I think there's a real disrespect and a desire to listen to policymakers and sometimes academics and think tanks about these kinds of problems, but very rarely are the actual practitioners called up to give a hand. What do you
Yeah.
think the solution for that is?
I think, I kind of think it needs to come from inside out, right? So you'll see occasionally, my kids were telling me the other day that they watched, and this is tangential, but you'll see where I'm going. There was a briefing or something up on the hill, and Jelly Roll, the musician, was there talking about his experience with drugs and fentanyl and all this other stuff. It got a ton of attention, right? And I think that's kind of ultimately what needs to happen. And it's kind of funny. There there aren't really celebrities per se to the general public out of our industry, right? I mean, there's celebrities that you and I would recognize. I mean, you had Bruce on your show very recently, right? I mean, he's as close to a celebrity in this field, as you probably get. Um, and there's others like that we internally respect and everything, but the general public, I mean, most people wouldn't know who Bruce is, and even, you know, even if they watched your show, they probably wouldn't put it together. So I think it's going to have to come kind of from inside. I think we're going to have to bubble some of this information up. We're going to have to find ways of connecting. But the other big draw here that I think is a problem for why we haven't made more of a wake, more noise when it comes to being represented and making these decisions. And I'll tell you, it breaks my heart every time I see Congress put out some new bill. And I just think to myself, like, I wouldn't let my grandma do this, but we just let 40 other people's grandmas and grandpas do this. It just blows me away. And so I think the thing that is holding us back is just general public doesn't connect with the seriousness, the scale of this problem, right? The drug thing hits home, right? People are dying. It's a huge problem in many small communities. But I don't think cybersecurity gets viewed the same way, right? I mean, even when a business gets taken down, you'll occasionally see. There was something on the news a couple of weeks ago. A husband and wife got phished. They stole like $230,000 from them, and it's gone. It's just gone. And that's that. So, you'll see those kinds of little things. And I think most people kind of laugh and go, huh, couldn't happen to me. And that's it. That's the extent of what they think about it. So I think it's kind of twofold, right? We don't have celebrities that are well known, and two, the average user, the average person on the street that doesn't do this for a living, doesn't care, doesn't truly care. They don't understand.
Yeah, I see that. I love your perspective on that, that it takes a celebrity to do that on a lot of levels. And I saw that Jelly Roll hearing. I thought it was poignant. I thought he was incredible. And I
Yeah.
think to myself, when I think of incredible hearings, I think about Dee Snider.
Okay. Yeah.
In the late 80s, early 90s, Dee Snider is a personal hero of mine, an incredible human being who testified so beautifully and eloquently on the necessity of art and freedom of expression, when it came to like labeling records as mature audiences only and trying to keep them away from kids. I think about Dee Snider having that conversation and doing it in full Dee Snider Twisted Sister getup and tattoos and piercings and that eye makeup. Mwah. What I want? I want Dee Snider on my broadcast. Is what I want. Really talking about like how do you get a message across when you are coming from a culture that is rejected by that mainstream, right? And on a lot of, Jones, I pass. I do. I pass. I've got tattoos. I've got piercings, but I can pass. Like as a
Sure.
respectable policy human being, right? Like I
Sure.
I barely pass, but I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I 2 months ago was in front of a Senate hearing, having this conversation, talking about small business. I, you know, there was nobody else in the room. There were a few senators, like Josh Hawley showed up to grandstand a little bit, and then ignored me because I was sitting there like this, like every time he opened his mouth and looked in my direction, I was like, "Come on, come on," he didn't take it. I was like, oh. But I think to myself, there was nobody else in that room.
Yeah.
Behind me, there was no one in the seats. No one was there to listen to why the Cyber Safety Review Board
Yeah.
matters and what we need to do about it, because we've got to have a body that is dealing with these major cyber incidents. And here's another thing that pisses me off. The CSRB was founded to investigate SolarWinds, an issue we know was deeply problematic. So far, they've done two investigations, which was Lapsus and Log4j, which basically come down to don't use SMS-based two-factor authentication and patch your shit.
Yep.
And you know what? I don't understand why we're almost 2 months out of the United Healthcare hack, and we haven't heard an announcement that that's the next investigation that they're going to do. Because is there a bigger one? Right? Like
No.
I want to see that happen. I genuinely want to see that happen, and I love and deeply respect the people on that board. I understand politics, but I mean, could you think of something else they should be doing with their time right now, Jones?
No, no, honestly, I can't.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, maybe with the exception of one thought, which is
Mhm.
really encouraging everybody to just go back to basics. That's the other soapbox that I stand on so often. It seems that the national conversation has moved to AI. Trying to force the sale of TikTok so we're not influencing kids in a certain way because a non-American company owns it. It seems like there's obviously a lot of cycles and a lot of thought and a lot of effort that's kind of being pushed in certain directions and things that are tangential and related to cybersecurity. But I just don't see where they're really connecting with the general public, and it's disheartening. I think it's the thing that frustrates me the most with with society in general. We're having these conversations that are right on the edge of cybersecurity, especially with regard to TikTok and things like that. But it's just not kind of jumping over fully into the lane. And for an industry that's as big and as critical as cybersecurity is, the fact that it has such a general misunderstanding or almost apathetic approach by the general public is just, it stymies me. I don't understand it. I don't get it. And I guess I'm kind of curious maybe what your thoughts are on why why the general public seems so apathetic. I mean, there's stories out that, when polled, people say that their security and everything is a highly desired thing for them. It's a really important thing. 77% of people say that their data security is paramount and critical. But in general, it just seems to be a very apathetic approach to cybersecurity. When Snowden happened, I remember hearing a lot of people just saying, "I always assumed the NSA was listening to everything, and that they were getting my emails and all this other stuff." And maybe that's it. Maybe that's as simple as it is. Is they just most people just assume that they're
Mm.
being spied on, and they've developed a level of comfort and callous to it. I don't know. What do you think about that? I'm genuinely curious where the
I think
apathy
it's
comes from.
I think it's nihilistic as hell. And at the same time, people are exhausted and there's some responsibility that our policymakers have, right? Like, you and I have both had these conversations with small businesses before where they're like, look, we've got the personal data of 5,000 people and it's devastating mental health data. And our budget this year for cybersecurity is $500.
Yep.
When that's happening, the problem there is the underlying incentives. It's not that there's something wrong with people, it's that there's something wrong with incentives. Because if that budget is there and it's $500, that's $500 more than most other businesses have allocated for cybersecurity. So they're starting off right. The first thing they do is the first thing I tell them if they've got a $500 budget a year is, all right, do you know who Troy Hunt is? Let's have a conversation about Have I Been Pwned? And I'm going to give you two books. You're going to get one
Yeah.
book by Adam Shostak and one book by Bruce Schneier, and it's going to
Yep.
be this is how hackers think, and this is how to think about your threats, right? Like I'm going to give those people that with $500, and that's as good as you can do. And you know what? They're still doing better than 80% of most American businesses if they've got a $500 a year budget for
Yeah.
cybersecurity. That's
Yeah.
where we've got to start changing this. And I think that this is where we get to the policy fixes you were talking about. When you talk about the Fed being able to step in, I think, let's be specific, I mean the Federal Trade Commission, because they have the
Sure.
right and capacity to sue businesses that don't live up to their obligations for their customers. I think that's the place we're going to go to with this. And I think the FTC is probably looking at a humdinger of a lawsuit against United Health and a couple of these other organizations. Thank God we switched away from them. We don't have United Healthcare in our business. I switched this away like, a month and a half before this happened. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, I mean, it's so bad, but oh God. I think about this and I just want to circle back to the fact that, I think maybe it's not that people are apathetic. They just think there, but for the grace of God, go I, right? They're exhausted all day long. Everybody's tired. What can we do on an individual basis? I know we're going to wrap up, pretty soon here, but what can we do on an individual basis? What could you give? What's your takeaway as you advise MSPs in this space? What's the takeaway that you give them for what they do next and how they can keep themselves safe on an ongoing basis? Best advice.
So I think it's just take responsibility for what you have. Now, if you're an organization, a healthcare organization that's dealing primarily in customer and patient data, if you're a financial firm that's dealing in customer money and finance, I think all of these things, it's really about taking responsibility for what you have, and uh, choosing to value the protection of your client base over, maybe over record setting profit. And I don't say that to sound like an anti-capitalist or anything like that. But I think there's a way to balance those things. They're not mutually exclusive, is I guess maybe what I'm trying to say. They're not mutually exclusive. You can be responsible. You can put safeguards in place. You can hire, folks like myself, folks like yourself, to bring Red Queen in to help with your compliance stuff. You can bring an MSSP in like Data Prize, or to help advise and steer you in the right direction. It's really just about prioritizing and taking responsibility. So I think if you do that, even if you have a non-existent budget, there are still things you can do. There are absolutely, um, you know, uh, safeguards that you can put in place. Even just understanding what your responsibilities are, and the kinds of data that you have, and just even understanding the threats that are out there. That doesn't have to cost a ton of money. So take responsibility, protect your stuff. That would be my takeaway for the day. Um, is just be accountable. Be accountable for what you got.
I love that. I absolutely love that. That accountability is super key in communication with your small businesses. You have that same job that my accountant has of translating what all this new tax law means to me,
Yeah,
right? And
exactly.
translating it in meaningful ways so I can make good decisions. So that's the responsibility you have. And at that point, your small businesses are going to make the decisions that they make. And that's a rough one. So yeah, we know that, but now I get to get to the fun question. I know you've heard this one before. So
Yeah.
here is my question for you, my friend. If
Okay.
you were not doing this for a living, if you were
Mhm.
not, VP of cybersecurity services at Data Prize, if you were not the person you are, and you had taken a different path at some point in an alternate universe, what is the life path you have taken, the career you'd have, the job you'd have now that you would be in that alternate universe? Money, no real object. Just what would you be doing that you love instead of this?
I would be working with my hands, honestly. Building houses is a thing that has always interested me. Uh, Working with my hands, building stuff, not necessarily just houses, but I love to tinker, in a workshop, in a garage. I live on a farm today, so the time that I'm not spending at a computer, I get to spend out on a farm with horses and goats and pigs, and there's always something that needs fixing or mending. I find it incredibly rewarding to see a broken thing, to be able to fix a broken thing, um, and to step back and be able to look at it and know it's fixed. So that's probably what I would do. I would just be blue collar, manual labor somewhere. There there are days that I get so frustrated that I think, man, like if I could just have a job digging a ditch today, like probably would have been a better day. But that's my answer. I'd work with my hands somewhere.
Yeah, I started thinking about this question because, we all in cybersecurity, we've got the other job we wish we were doing.
Yeah,
People are like, I would be a blacksmith, I'd be a brewer, I'd be, every one of us wants a cabin in the woods,
sure. Oh
not
yeah,
not
yeah,
cabin in the woods, but a cabin in the
yeah, yeah.
woods, and I was like, man, what is that job for everybody? And it's always great to hear what it is. Man, Jones, this was absolutely incredible. Is there a way that we should keep in touch with you? Is there any links we should follow? Any information we should have about you? How do we get in touch with you? How do people reach out to you? What's going on here?
So LinkedIn is probably the best place to get me. I've stepped up my game, publishing a lot more content out there. So if you want to reach out, have a conversation, I love talking with folks in the community. Love answering questions and meeting new people. So LinkedIn is the best place to get me. If you would like to reach out and talk, I try not to do most other social media, just because I work in the job that I do. So LinkedIn is the spot.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough. All right, folks, that was this week's cybersecurity office hours. Jones, it was such a joy and a pleasure to have you here with us. Folks, I've got some great news. Next week, we're going to have as our guest Jake Malware Tech Williams. It's going to be so wonderful to have a dear friend like that aboard, having a great conversation with us. I am absolutely looking forward to that conversation. I mean, I feel like there's going to be coffee as well, but not as much quality bitching. Like Jones, you're amazing, and I'm so glad to have had you aboard this week. Folks, have a wonderful week. It was a joy and a pleasure. As always, I'm Tara Wheeler, CEO of Red Queen Dynamics. Let us know if we can help in any way, shape, or form. Bye just for now.